Well, there's just 10 days to go until the Rugby World Cup starts in France, and if you're like me, you're pretty excited about that. There's going to be some fantastic rugby coming up. And in this video, I thought I'd take a deeper look at the pool stage of this year's competition because I've been doing some analysis on that. And I think I found something that you might be interested in. Bonjour, buongiorno, kia ora, guten morgen, and all the rest of it. I hope you're all well around the world. My name's Mark. I'm a Kiwi rugby fan who's living here in beautiful Cancun in Mexico, and yes, you're going to see a lot more of Cancun throughout my video. So there's a good reason just to subscribe to my channel and give this video a like. Okay, so we're only 10 days away from the Rugby World Cup. It's getting pretty exciting, and I thought I'd take a deeper dive into what's going to happen in the pool stages. And I found out something that you might be really interested in, because it's easy to make a video about who's going to win the pool and what our predictions are, but I think we've got to look a little bit more deeper into it because there's something that's going on with the scheduling that I think is going to make a difference. So if you have been watching my videos up until now, you'll know that I've talked a lot about injuries and discipline and recovery for players going into the World Cup. It's going to be very, very important, as is the depth of all the squads in each of the teams. But something else that we may have overlooked until now, because you're seeing it here first on my channel, I hope, and that is the scheduling of the games and how many days off some of the teams have between each of their games. And this is going to be critically important, I think, because it's going to give players obviously a time to recover from hard games and also prepare them for the not so difficult games. But it's also going to be important when it comes to back-to-back difficult games and how teams are going to have to back up after a rugged affair. So I've looked into what I consider to be the top 11 teams going into this year's Rugby World Cup with a chance of winning. And I've had a look at their schedules, and what I've done is I put together a presentation for you all to have a look at. We're going to run through it, and we're going to see how many days off each of these teams have between each of their games, and more importantly, they're very difficult games. So as I go through these graphics, I want you to check out how many days in between each team has before their next game and who their opponent is, because I think that's going to be really important when it comes to overcoming injuries and things like that. So first up, we're going to have a look at Ireland's schedule for their pool stages of this year's Rugby World Cup. And of course, they're in Pool B with Romania, Tonga, South Africa and Scotland. A very interesting pool indeed, particularly after the warm-up games that we've just watched throughout the summer series. Now, Ireland will kick off their campaign against Romania, so most people will think that's going to be a fairly easy game for Ireland, and so you'd probably think that Ireland are going to put out their second team to play against Romania. No disrespect to my Romanian viewers, of course, but that's likely to happen. And then next up for Ireland is going to be Tonga, and that's 7 days after the Romanian game, and we'd probably expect to see a fairly strong team from Ireland go out against Tonga. Let me know what you think about that one. Do you think that's what Ireland's strategy is going to be in terms of putting out a fairly strong team for that game? Because just 7 days after that, they've got South Africa, which is going to be one of the key games in this particular pool, Pool B of the Rugby World Cup. So if Ireland do get some injuries in that game against Tonga, they've got just 1 week to overcome them and get everybody ready for that big clash against the Springboks, which will be 7 days later. So let me know what you think. Do you think that Ireland are going to put out a top team for that game against Tonga, or do you think they're going to save their number 1 team for the game against South Africa? Can they afford to go light on Tonga? I don't think so, but I'd be really interested to know your views on that one. And then after they've played South Africa, they've got 14 days before they play Scotland, so 2 weeks to recover after what I'm sure is going to be a brutal encounter against South Africa. So how do they go about that? Do they put their well, they're going to have to put their number 1 team in against South Africa, aren't they? And then they're going to have to back up 14 days later against Scotland, which they should be able to do, as long as nobody gets any serious knocks in that game. So 2 weeks off for them between the South African game and the Scotland game. Now let's go on and look at the All Blacks. They're going to be playing France, of course, as the opening game in this year's Rugby World Cup on September the 11th. France and New Zealand, of course, in Pool A in this year's 2023 Rugby World Cup. And after the All Blacks play France, they will play Namibia, and they'll do that 7 days after that opening game. No doubt the All Blacks are going to put in a full strength team against that French team, so any injuries they do pick up, they'll have an opportunity to rest those players against Namibia in their second game, which, as I said, is 7 days later. Then after the All Blacks play Namibia, they'll take on Italy, and they've got 14 days to prepare for that game after the Namibia game, so 2 weeks basically. So you would expect the All Blacks would put out a second string team to play Namibia and give those players plenty of time to recover to play Italy. I think the All Blacks will go in with a strong team against Italy. They can't afford not to, but they've got 2 weeks in between that game. More importantly, they've got 3 weeks since the French game to put the number one team out there against Italy, if that's what they choose to do. Now it's a bit of a balancing act, this, because we saw the 3 week gap between the All Blacks playing last until they took the Springboks on at Twickenham last week, and we all saw what happened then. So this might be a case that Foster and crew want to keep the All Black A team ticking over. So I think we might see the A team going into battle pretty much as possible in this year. And then after that Italy game, New Zealand play Uruguay, and again they've got 7 days, so a week to prepare for that game. And I think they'll put in a fairly second-rate team for that game against Uruguay, considering they're going to be waiting for the quarter-final if they qualify for the quarter-final of this year's Rugby World Cup. So the All Blacks schedule looks like 7 days off between their first and second game, 14 days off between the second and third game, and then 7 days off before their last game. So they've got their long time spell in the middle of their group games. Next up, let's take a look at France's schedule, and of course they're in Pool A along with New Zealand and the rest of the teams that I just said. And after they play the All Blacks, they've got 6 days until they play Uruguay. Of course, I think they will be putting in a B team to play that game against Uruguay. After France play Uruguay in their second match, they will then play Namibia, and that game's going to be 7 days after they play Uruguay. So will they choose an A team to go up against Namibia? I don't think they will. Now the big thing for France in their pool stage of the competition will be they have to wait 14 days to play their last game against Italy. So from the time they play New Zealand until they play Italy, which we would expect to be their first team, there's going to be almost a month, 29 days in between those two games. So let me know what you think France are going to do with their strategy. Do you think they're going to put their A team in against Uruguay and Namibia, or do you think they're going to keep those players fresh for that last game against Italy and then heading into a quarter-final after that? Next up, we're going to look at South Africa, and they're in Pool B, of course, with Scotland, Ireland, Romania and Tonga. So let's have a look at the days they've got off in between each of their games. So the Springboks start off with that mouth-watering clash against Scotland, and then they've got 7 days off before they play Romania. So I would expect they put out their A team against Scotland and then give them a rest possibly against Romania. What do you think about that? Do you think that's the way that South Africa is going to play this pool? And then South Africa in their third game will play Ireland. They've got 6 days off between that Romania game and the Irish game. We would expect their A team to be in against Ireland. And then their last encounter is going to be that bruising one against Tonga. And I don't think any team can afford to take their pedal off the metal when it comes to Tonga in this year's Rugby World Cup. They've got at least 5 ex-All Blacks in that team, which should see them do very, very good if they can keep their consistency up throughout this particular tournament. So we're expecting South Africa, of course, to put their A team in against Ireland, and then they've got 9 days off until they play Tonga. So anybody that gets a knock in that game, if it's not too serious, should be good to go against Tonga, and I expect South Africa to head into that game with a very strong team. Now, don't forget, South Africa got a lot of depth in their squad, so a strong team could be, in the eyes of some, their B team to take on Tonga in that game. But I'm sure at that stage South Africa will have one eye on the quarterfinals, and they'll be making sure that they keep their group healthy and fit and ready to go for that quarterfinal clash. So let me know what you think South Africa's strategy is going to be when it comes to these particular games. And the days off, who do you think they're going to put their A team in against, and who do you think they're going to hold back against, if anybody, in Pool B of this year's Rugby World Cup? Then we go on and look at one of South Africa's opponents in Pool B of this year's Rugby World Cup, and that's going to be Scotland, of course, and they take on South Africa in that mouth-watering game, as I just mentioned. And then Scotland's got 14 days off, 2 weeks off, before they play Tonga in their second game. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of battled, hardened warriors getting beaten up by the Springboks in that first game. So they're going to need that 2 weeks, I think, to overcome that one before they go into another bruising battle, and this time against the Pacific Islanders in Tonga. And this is what I was alluding to at the beginning of the video. Some of these teams' schedules have got two back-to-back really tough games where injuries and discipline could be really an issue for them. So we're going to have to watch how Scotland go in these first two games, particularly against Tonga and South Africa. Two bruising encounters, I think, for the Scottish team. And Gregor Townsend will be wanting to make sure that his team keeps all their players as fit as long as possible, as will. So 6 days after that game against Tonga, they'll take on Romania. So an opportunity for Scotland to put out a semi-B team, I think, against Romania, and give us some of those A players who probably played in that game against South Africa and Tonga a little bit of a rest before they get into their last game of the pool, which is going to be a very exciting game against Ireland. I've got to say, two of the games that I'm really looking forward to in this year's Rugby World Cup in the pool stages is that game between Scotland and South Africa, their first game for Scotland, and their last game against Ireland, which is going to be a cliffhanger, I think. And there's 7 days after that last game for Romania, I say, between Romania and Ireland game for Scotland. And there's no doubt about it, they're going to have to put in their A team against Ireland. And also, if they're in an opportunity then to go through to the quarterfinals, they're going to have to watch out for injuries again, because that quarterfinal game is going to be very tough no matter who they come up against. So that's Scotland's schedule for the pool stages of this year's Rugby World Cup. Let me know what you think Scotland's going to do in terms of when they're going to rest their A team. Can they afford to rest their A team? And what games do you think are going to be the most critical for Scotland? So now we're going to have a look at Pool C for the first time, and one of the teams in there is Wales, and they're in Pool C against Australia, Fiji, Georgia and Portugal. So an interesting group as well. We've got some newcomers to World Rugby. We've got some teams that are getting really established and playing very well, like Georgia. We've got Australia that's in rebuilding phase, no doubt about that, with Eddie Jones at the helm. And we've got Fiji, of course, who had that historic win against England at Twickenham last weekend. And Wales, under Warren Gatland, also rebuilding his team. And I think this is going to be a really interesting group to watch. So Wales has got Fiji first up in their Pool C group, and that's going to be a cliffhanger of a game, that one. After what Fiji did to England, there'll be a lot of motivation in that Fiji team for sure. And they'll truly believe that they can take Wales down in that first game. And then second up for Wales, they've got Portugal, and that's 6 days after the Fiji team, after the Fiji game. So they've got time there to get some rest into their A team, I think, and take Portugal on with their B side. And again, no disrespect to our friends in Portugal. Love the way that you play rugby, and I'm sure that the game is going to grow and grow in your country in the years to come. So Wales' first two games, Fiji and Portugal, within 7 days of each other. Going to be a really interesting one. And then after that game with Portugal, they've got 8 days, Wales, until they play Australia. They're going to have to put their A team in for that game, I suspect. Some cheeky people might say that they'll beat Australia with their B team, but I think they'll need to put in their A team against Australia. So an 8-day break between Portugal game and Australia should give Wales time enough to get their A team fully recovered. And then their last game is 13 days later after that Australian game, and it's against Georgia. And I got to tell you, I'm very impressed with Georgia. They did a great job, I thought, in that first half against Scotland. And if they can keep up that kind of standard of rugby for 80 minutes, they're going to give some of the teams in this group a hard time. So expect to see a good performance from Georgia in that game against Scotland. So a 13-day gap between the game against Australia before they head into that game against Georgia. And I tell you what, that game against Georgia is going to be really interesting to watch, to see how Wales go in that particular game. So there we go, that's Wales's path through the pool stages of this year's Rugby World Cup. Let me know what you think. Do you think they're going to put their A team in as many games as they can, or do you think they'll give their B team a run against Portugal? Interested to know what you think. And what do you think about these teams having 2 weeks off? Is that going to cause them any problems, particularly if they're not playing their A team all the way through the pool stages of this Rugby World Cup? Drop me your comments, let me know what you think about that, and how do you think the coaches are going to handle that process as they go through the pool stage. Okay, next up in this little exercise is Fiji. Of course, we just talked about them in Pool C against Wales, Australia, Georgia and Portugal. Of course, Fiji is going to be playing Wales in that first exciting encounter in Pool C. And then they've got Australia 7 days later. So 2 really tough games. And again, I mentioned this at the beginning of the video. Some teams are going to have to play their A team back to back and in a fairly short time frame. So any knocks that Fijians get against Wales in that Welsh game, they're going to have to go into Australia with the strongest team that they can possibly. I'm also looking forward to their 3rd game in this pool stage of the Rugby World Cup. Fiji, they're going to be playing Georgia, and they've got 13 days between the Australia game and the Georgia game, and they're going to have to field their A team against Georgia, that's for sure. And anybody that gets a knock in that Australia game, they'll have to be well rested, and they've got almost 2 weeks to do that before they line up against Georgia. Let me know who you think is going to win that one. I think that's going to be a really interesting game, that Fiji versus Georgia. Not sure they've ever played before. I have to go back and check my records, but the way Georgia's playing, I think they might give Fiji a bit of a run for their money, particularly in the first half. Anyway. Fiji's got Portugal as their last game in the pool stage of this year's Rugby World Cup. They've got a 9-day gap between the game against Georgia and then the game against Portugal. They'll be able to rest any injuries that they have against Portugal and make sure that they're ready for the quarterfinals if they're going to qualify at that stage. And who knows, we might come down to a situation where it might be how many points they score against Portugal might make the difference for Fiji getting into this year's Rugby World Cup quarterfinals. It's going to be exciting, Pool C. Let me know how you think those teams are going to be affected by the days off they've got between each of their games. Okay, let's have a look at Pool D for the first time, and the team we're looking at is England's schedule for Pool D, and they're going to be playing Argentina, Japan, Chile and Samoa. So some big games in there for England, and of course they're starting off with their opening game against Argentina, and we're all looking forward to that. After England's poor performance in the warm-up series, everybody's hoping they come right and we have a great clash against Argentina. Either way, it's going to be a bone rattler, that game for England, and I wouldn't be surprised if players on both sides get a bit of a beating up. So that's going to be an important factor to look for as England go into their pool stage. So after that opening encounter, England have 14 days basically to give their B team a bit of a run against either Japan or Chile. But I think there might be some viewers saying we can't afford to put an England B team against Japan. Well, unfortunately, Japan haven't found their strap so far this year, so let's hope they do bring it to the Rugby World Cup, because they're a very exciting team. We've always seen their heroics in previous World Cups that they've qualified for, and we all watch the cherry blossoms with a lot of interest because they do ignite the games that they play in, and also their fans are great to watch in the stadiums as well. So Japan and Chile are the second and third games for England in this group, and they've got 14 days off since the Chile game before they play Samoa, and of course that one's going to be a bone rattler as well. And after that performance by Samoa versus Ireland last week, I'm very interested to see whether Samoa can just cut out some of those errors that cost them that game against Ireland, and by the time they reach the stage of playing against England, who knows, they might be ready to cause an upset. So let me know. England are going to have to play their A team against Samoa, there's no doubt about it, but they do have 14 days off after the Chile game to prepare for that. So how do you think England are going to go through this pool stage? Can they afford to rest some of their players, or are they going to be looking for form as they go through the pool stages and give their A team an opportunity to click into some rhythms, some combinations, and more importantly to score some tries and start to feel freer out there on the fields of France? Let me know what you think England's strategy is going to be as they go through the pool stages of this year's Rugby World Cup. Okay, next up is Argentina in the same group, of course, as England. That's Pool D, and after that bruising encounter, I'm sure, which it'll be against England, they've got Samoa up next. So this is another one of those teams where I said they've got back-to-back difficult games coming up in their pool section of this year's Rugby World Cup. But there is 12 days for Argentina to get ready for Samoa, so any bruises they pick up against England they should have sorted out, and their players be ready to go for that bruising encounter against Samoa. I'm really interested in this one. Going to be a huge battle in the forwards, and it's going to be a competition of who's got the best backline on the day, I think, because either one of those teams, Argentina or Samoa, have the potential to open up the game in the backline. However, it might depend on the weather conditions. It might also depend on who's winning good, clean ball in that game. Don't worry, I'm going to be coming back with videos on my predictions for these games later on. Today we're just looking at the scheduling, and I want to know your thoughts around whether the scheduling is going to make it difficult for some of these teams in the pool stages. So second up for Argentina is going to be that game against Samoa, a bruising. And then after that one, they've got Chile 7 days later, Argentina, and then they've got their last game against Japan 9 days later. So a good healthy gap for Argentina in there. I don't expect them to have any trouble with either Chile or Japan. So if they're getting ready for the quarterfinal stage, they'll have a good knockout against Japan. They'll probably put their A team in for that game, and hopefully they'll be on fire to go into the quarterfinal stage in this year's Rugby World Cup. So that's Argentina's path through the pool stage of this year's Rugby World Cup. Let me know what you think. Do you think those two bruising encounters against England and Samoa are going to make the difference for Argentina? Do you think they're going to be able to back up and win those two games? Interested to know your comments, please. Okay, just two more teams to go in my review of the pool schedules of those teams that I think have a chance of getting through to the quarterfinals in this year's Rugby World Cup. And I'm having a look at the scheduling, the days between each of the games for these teams, and what impact it might have on their journey through the Rugby World Cup. Now the next team we're going to look at is Samoa, so also there in Group D. Now Samoa is one of the last teams to kick off this year's Rugby World Cup pool stage. They've got to sit around until September the 16th, which of course is 8 days after that first game where the All Blacks will play France. And they'll start their campaign against Chile. So some would say that's going to be a relatively easy game for Samoa. Whether or not they put their A team in, we'll have to wait and see. But they'll be sitting around watching all the other games, I'm sure, before they kick off on September the 16th. So then there's a 6-day gap for that Samoa team before they play Argentina, which I'm sure is going to be a bruising encounter in Pool D. So 6 days for them to get ready. And then after that, they've got another 6 days off before they play Japan. And that's going to be an interesting game, I think, also between Samoa and Japan. And the last game for Samoa in their pool stage is going to be England, and they've got 9 days off to prepare for that game after the Japan game. So a fairly good draw there, I think, for Samoa. I think they can start off against Chile and get their nerves out and get everything right as they prepare for that Argentina game. It gives them a good run up to that game. Unlike some of the other teams like France and the All Blacks, they've got to hit the ground running, and they've got to play their best rugby right from the very start. I think Samoa are going to have an opportunity to play another warm-up game to get them. And the last team I want to look at in this particular video in relation to the scheduling of the pool games in this year's Rugby World Cup is Australia in Pool C. And it's going to be really interesting to see how Australia handle and manage their way through the scheduling of their Pool C competition. Australia has a first game against Georgia, and many would say this is a warm-up game, but I think Australia needs to be very careful with this game. This could be a banana skin for Australia if they don't watch out, and they got to give Georgia all the respect that they are due, that's for sure. Interesting game for Australia to kick off against Georgia. Then after that Georgia game, and I'm sure there's going to be some battle hardened warriors from that game come through, they're going to be playing Fiji. That's right, 8 days later they play Fiji, and that's going to be a critical game for Australia. I'm sure the boys would have been all sitting down watching Fiji beat England, and probably got a little bit nervous in watching that game. So they're going to have to turn up with their A team, and they're going to have to be on fire. So if they get through that Georgia game unscathed, then they're going to have to be ready to take on Fiji. And then it's basically a week off between their next two games for Australia. They'll play Wales 7 days later, and then after Wales 7 days later they'll play Portugal in their final game of the pool stage of this year's Rugby World Cup. And if Australia are going to go through to the quarterfinals, then they're going to be battled hardened, I'm sure, ready to get into that quarterfinal competition, whoever they are going to meet. And I'll do videos on the possible outcomes for quarterfinals in another video. So there we go, that's the path of those 11 teams that I've selected that I think have a chance of getting through to this year's Rugby World Cup quarterfinals. And of course 11 doesn't go into 8, so we're going to get some complications there along the way. But I thought it might have been interesting to you all to have a look at that scheduling, considering there's for some teams up to 14 days, 15 days between games, and other teams are playing weekend back to back, and particularly tough games as well. So let me know what you think of this scheduling. Does it favour one team more than the other, particularly those ones that I've highlighted in this video? Or do you think it's a load of rubbish what I'm saying, and it's not going to impact at all the outcome of this year's Rugby World Cup? Of course, we've got to look out for injuries and all those disciplinary possibilities that might happen during these pool games. But I think the scheduling is going to have an impact on some of these teams, particularly maybe. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, about looking at the scheduling for the pool games in this year's Rugby World Cup. Quite interesting, isn't it, to have a look at how many days off these teams have got between each game. Now, before I go, just a reminder, please give this video a thumbs up and a liking, and also hit that little subscribe button. It does me the world of good to see more and more people subscribing. And please keep your comments coming from all over the world. Now we've got people engaging in this channel, which is fantastic. I read all the comments. I love your comments. They're very, very good. Keep respectful. We're a global rugby family. We treat each other with respect. Please remember to do that. And also check out the community page here on my YouTube channel. Lots of things I'm popping up there asking for your input and your poll vote. And we'll be doing more of that as we head into this year's Rugby World Cup. Okay, that's it for now. I'm off to enjoy the beautiful Cancun weather. The hurricane is gone, and I'll be seeing you all again very soon. Until then, stay well, stay safe, and remember to keep enjoying your rugby. Bye for now.